Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so pleased to have you. This is Conscious Leadership, Elevating Humanity Through Business. On behalf of the Executives Club of Chicago, we'd like to thank our sponsors for today and our Food and Beverage Forum leaders. We have TJ Mulvihill from Barry Callebaut and Christina Conlon from Baker McKenzie. So we have a lot to get to today. I'm going to hand things over for some welcome remarks for TJ. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Hello to the Executives Club community out there. As Megan said, welcome to our Food and Beverage Forum event, Conscious Leadership, Elevating Humanity Through Business, with Whole Foods CEO, John Mackey. I'm TJ Mulvihill, VP of Marketing for the Americas at Barry Callebaut, world leader in chocolate and cocoa, also a new co-chair of the Food and Beverage Forum. So really happy to be a part of this community and here speaking to you today. Excited to welcome everyone to the Fireside Chat with John. Also really pleased to have Thea Durfee-Polancic along to help moderate and facilitate the discussion. Thea is the former president and founder of the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. So thanks in advance here, Thea, for helping us today. I know I won't do John justice here, but a few notes for anyone who's not familiar. He transformed Whole Foods from one store in 1978 in Austin into a Fortune 500 company, a leading retailer, now more than 500 locations and nearly 100,000 team members across the US, Canada, and the UK. John is a strong believer in free market principles and co-founded the Conscious Capitalism movement. He's written several books along the way. His latest, again, informing today's event, Conscious Leadership, Elevating Humanity Through Business. And I know that information attendees today, I think, have been sent some information on how to order the book through our partner, The Bookstall, also with a nice discount. So, hey, if you haven't seen that yet, I think there will be a follow-up email going out after our chat today. So, hey, without any further ado, I think let me turn it over to Thea and John. Take it away.
Thank you, TJ, and thank you to the Executives Club for your partnership with the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. We really value that relationship, and we're really excited to be here together today. It is my distinct pleasure to be able to facilitate a conversation together with John. And it's also quite a celebration for us too, since this is, I think, our 13th year as the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. So it really felt like, in honor of John's new book, of your new book, Conscious Leadership, and the longevity of the chapter, this felt like just a perfect opportunity. So thank you, John, for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Thea. It's good to be with you today.
It's great to be with you. I thought it might be useful, since we have folks who have, some people are familiar with the whole conscious capitalism movement, some people aren't. I thought it might be really helpful for us to start out just around to get some sense of what conscious capitalism is as a movement. How would you describe that for folks who've never encountered that before?
Well, conscious capitalism is capitalism. It's based on free market principles. But business has a bad reputation in the world. It's attacked constantly as being greedy and selfish and exploitative, which of course they're bad actors in business, but just like there are in all different aspects of life. But in general, business creates value for other people. Business creates win-win-win scenarios. Customers gain, employees gain, suppliers gain, investors gain, and the larger community gains. And so, but that's not well understood. And so conscious capitalism starts with the idea that every business has a purpose besides just making a profit. Profits are good, but hey, doctors are well compensated, but their higher purpose isn't to make money, it is to heal people. Teachers educate, architects design things, engineers construct buildings and whatnot. All of the professions refer back to some type of higher purpose that includes making money, but not limited to it. And business, all business is no different than that. Business is about making money, but it's also about having a higher purpose. And secondly, all the stakeholders matter in business. That's the second pillar of conscious capitalism. So of course, the shareholders matter, the investors matter, but so do the customers, so do the employees, so do the suppliers, so do the communities we're part of. In fact, they're all integrated together. They're best thought of as a system that's connected together. And they should be managed in a very conscious way to create value for all of them in a conscious way. Third, we need a new kind of leadership, one that is more of a servant leadership style that serves the purpose of the higher purpose of the business, serves its stakeholders, isn't just about lining its own pockets because it now has power. And fourth, we should create a type of cultures. The fourth pillar is creating a culture that allows human beings to flourish in their jobs. Most companies, most of the people, studies show, are not particularly engaged. It's earning a living, but they don't have any real care for the business, no real passion. And that comes back to culture. So creating businesses where humans can be fully themselves and can reach their higher potentials in life. So those are the four pillars of conscious capitalism.
So thank you for that. And just drilling in on the stakeholder pillar there a little bit, I think we're hearing a lot about stakeholder capitalism, and that's being used in a lot of different ways. I heard you define it a particular way, but what is can you provide some clarity in light of some of the ways in which that term is being used?
I do believe that word is being abused from the way the word originated and what it was intended. If you study Ed Freeman's work, who's oftentimes cited as the father of stakeholder theory, a business professor at Darden Graduate School, University of Virginia. And it's not that all the stakeholders should have control of the business. The investors should have control of the business for a variety of reasons. However, what stakeholder theory understands is that all the stakeholders do matter. And the management of a business has a responsibility to all of those stakeholders. And in fact, good conscious leaders do that sort of automatically. They understand that if a business is going to flourish over the long term, if the investors are going to flourish over the long term, you have to take care of your customers. You have to create value for them because you want to have a continued long-term relationship with them. It's the employees working for the business that oftentimes are the ones most responsible for creating customer satisfaction and customer fulfillment. So you have to manage the business so that the employees are well trained, that they take care of the customers, and they're going to take the best care of the customers if they feel like their work is meaningful and if they're cared for and if the job is one that is worth doing. And so all the stakeholders matter, the suppliers matter, they're not something to be ground down and exploited. And they're all sort of interconnected. And so once you become aware of the interconnection, you begin to manage the business system so that all of the stakeholders will flourish. But this is the best strategy to maximize long-term profits as well. It's not a win-lose game. It's a win-win-win game. And that's the biggest difference. It begins to move away from this paradigm of someone winning, someone losing. It's all about hyper-competition. There's a competitive element in business, to be sure, but that's the wrong paradigm. It's not really a win-lose paradigm. It's a win-win-win paradigm. And stakeholders just stakeholder theory recognizes that all the stakeholders matter, and we should manage a business so that they're all flourishing and winning. It's not anti-profit. It's not anti-stockholder. That's a distortion by the enemies of capitalism, not the defenders of it.
I hear you emphasizing that term long-term a couple of different times, and it feels like that's a key part of the picture here on conscious capitalism.
It absolutely is. Thinking long-term, in fact, is one of the chapters in our recent book on conscious leadership, because business is primarily about creating value over the long term. I mean, sure, there can be people that get into business to make a quick buck. But most businesses that last, the lasting businesses are those that think long-term, that are finding ways. I mean, if you take Whole Foods as an example, when we sign a new store, we're usually signing a 20-year lease with options that'll take it up to 30, 40, 50 years sometimes. So we are making a very long-term decision. A store might make a profit in the first year, but we're really making an investment and putting a lot of capital in, assuming we're going to get a payoff down the road. And we have to think about what that location will be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Is it growing? Is it declining? It's the same way investing in people, because you, the initial, if you have a high turnover, it takes a lot of money to train people at Whole Foods. And if we're always turning everybody over, then we're constantly training people, or we have people working for us that aren't particularly skilled. So we're investing in their long-term, and if they're going to rise up to become leaders in the company, then when we're investing in their leadership skills as well. So that in general, business pays off over the long term. And it's important that we manage the business with that in mind, really all the time.
I feel like that really resonates in a place like the Midwest and in Chicago. We've seen in our experience over the past, 10 plus years, that a lot of the companies that are drawn to the conscious capitalism business chapter, or to the movement, say, they say a couple things. They say, first of all, I thought this was just the right way to do business. I didn't know that there was a club. And there are a lot of family-owned, family-run businesses, multi-generational businesses that we find that are drawn to the conscious capitalism movement. So it feels like that really resonates with this thinking long-term.
Thea, one of the things we say as you know, we say in the conscious capitalist movement is there's so many unconscious conscious capitalists, because they may not have the language for it, but this is just good business. I mean, we're calling it conscious capitalism or conscious business, but it's really just a smart way to run your business, run their business this way already. They're just, because business is so much under attack, it's really under attack today in particular, and somehow or another, it's just greedy and selfish and exploitative. And the great value creation business is doing in the world is not seen. There's tons of anti-capitalists in the academic world. The intellectuals have pretty much most intellectuals throughout history have hated business. Commerce has been seen as basically, not really very ethical. It's about making money. So one of the things we're trying to do with conscious capitalism and conscious leadership is kind of reframe this narrative that business is about creating value for others, and it has a higher purpose. And it is about stakeholders. And this is a better way to sell. This is a better way to present business in the 21st century. It's just simply a better narrative, and it's a better way to think about it.
So let me ask you, John, I hear a lot of times from leaders, this all sounds great, but we're going through a tough year, or we just have to, we're just trying to survive right now. What do you say to folks who are in that? And I'm sure Whole Foods has had its own challenges over the last 12 months, has not been a cakewalk, but just what do you say to folks who say, like, you know what, I'm just trying to survive. I don't have the ability to do this kind of thing right now.
Yeah, there's an assumption implicit in that statement, which is, this is a nice thing to do, but it's expensive. It's not good business. Can't afford to do it. And the assumption is that somehow or another, this is a luxury thing you should do if your business is very successful, but otherwise, forget it. No, this is the key to being successful. Maybe one of the reasons you're struggling is because you're not doing it. And this is not a trade-off. This is not a win-lose thing. This strategy results in greater business success over the long term. It creates more value, not just for customers and employees and suppliers and communities. It creates greater prosperity for the investors. It's a more profitable way to do business. You can't afford not to do this, because businesses that care about their customers, who help train and empower their team members to flourish, who have partnerships with their suppliers, who are good members of their communities, they're just more successful. So I reject the premise of the question that somehow that this is a trade-off. We're making a trade-off here. I don't think so. You're doing good business when you do this, and you're going to be more successful if you do, and less successful if you don't.
So how do you handle that? Just to kind of push on that a little bit more, how do you handle that? Or what would you say to someone who is looking at, like, okay, win, 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 that sounds great, but there are some times where we're going to have to do something that costs our suppliers for the favor in the benefit of our value proposition or our customers, or like, are there times where the stakeholder, one or another stakeholder gets the short end of the stick? And how do you handle that?
Well, the answer is, of course, but I submit, at least theoretically, that that's just a failure of imagination and a failure of creativity, because we're so locked into a paradigm of win-lose. We're not thinking creatively about what's the win-win-win solution. How can all the stakeholders win? And once you begin to take that sort of framework on, you start seeing it through that lens, your creative mind gets unleashed to come up with new creative solutions. And that doesn't mean sometimes you just won't have enough imagination and you'll have to make trade-offs. I'm not denying that. That'd be utopianism. But what I have found personally, and many other people that are on this path, is that once you begin to ask the question, what's the win-win-win solution, you unlock the mind creatively to begin to come up with solutions that it wouldn't ordinarily come up with as long as you're in a win-lose framework. So I can't promise you that there won't be failures of creativity and imagination. Certainly I've had plenty in my business career, and Whole Foods has made plenty of mistakes, and we have not always, I mean, this is a strategy. It's a way to think about business differently. But I mean, sometimes we make trade-offs that we wish we didn't have to make. A lot of times those trade-offs occur because we made bad decisions in the past. And the roosters come home to roost, so to speak, and then a trade-off's necessary. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, sometimes a business might have to lay off some of its workers. You have to reorganize yourself, or something in the business environment has changed. Perhaps there's new competitors that are innovating, and you have to shift and evolve your business. And you try to put a win-win-win framework on it, but there's no getting around it. Even if you want your employees to win collectively, it might be necessary for the good of the whole organization that you have to eliminate a certain part of your business or cut it back. And that's the right thing for all the stakeholders, even if an individual or a few people end up losing their jobs. Now at Whole Foods, when we do that, we generally try to find them other jobs within the company and try to retrain them, but maybe not at the same rate of pay they were making. And many of them will take a package and leave. So this is not, business is difficult, and we are constantly having to evolve. We constantly have to get better. And I'm just saying this is a better way to think about it, but I'm not suggesting it creates a perfect utopia. You're not going to have challenges, and you're not going to have failures of creativity and imagination. But I will say that once you begin to think this way and use this as a framework, you will come up with new creative solutions that you never would have come up with if you hadn't given yourself permission to think this way.
I'm appreciating what you're saying, John, just sort of the combination of the aspirational as well as pragmatism. And it feels like that's a theme that pervades conscious capitalism in general.
It's a theme that pervades all business. Business is the art of the possible. It's what you can do. And the possible changes over time, but we'll always have to, I don't want to say make trade-offs or make compromises or cut corners, because that all puts it in a way that I wouldn't want to put it. We do what we can do, and we do the best that we can do. And over time, we can do better tomorrow than we did today or yesterday. So it's a never-ending struggle, and that's just the way business is. And frankly, I love that part about business. I'm constantly, you never can rest on your laurels. You always have to continue to improve. You always have to come up with new and better solutions, because competitors are innovating, and even when you come up with good ideas, they copy them. So you have to continue to innovate to create value. Again, one of our chapters in our book is Innovate to Create Value. It never ends. It's fun, but you got to be prepared for the continued struggle of excellence, which never stops.
Thank you. So I want to transition to the book in a second, but I actually would love to hear about that first gathering. So from what I understand, Conscious Capitalism got started around like 2005, and it was an initial gathering of you with some folks that you invited to kind of come together. And the world has changed a lot. I mean, we've seen these ideas and purpose-driven business and values-driven business have really become, much more mainstream in the last 20 years or so. But I just wonder, like, what was that like, that first gathering.
Well, the origins of conscious capitalism really started. I read Raj Sisodia and David Wolf's book, Firms of Endearment. And naturally, I liked it because they found 30 companies that were loved by all their stakeholders, and Whole Foods happened to be one of those 30 companies. So I naturally liked that book. And I contacted David and Raj, got together with them. Raj and I, we all hit it off, but David got sick and he got leukemia and died. So he didn't get to be on the journey with us that long, unfortunately. But Raj and I hit it off. And so we created the very first Conscious Capitalism gathering back in Austin, maybe 15 years ago or so. And we invited about 15 people. We invited more. We got about 15 people to show up. And that first meeting was almost the end of it at the beginning, because about 2 hours in on the first day, I looked around and said, these guys are all a bunch of socialists. They're not conscious capitalists. They hate capitalism. They hate business. These are a bunch of intellectuals who really want to transition the economy to a more government-dominated economy, which is a type of socialism. So I told Raj, I said, Raj, I'm never going to hold another meeting like this. I want to bring business people in, and not the intellectuals who don't like us. And so the second meeting went better, and we began to create our own tribe of other business entrepreneurs and other business leaders who thought in terms of purpose, who thought in terms of stakeholders, who were trying to create win-win-win solutions. And it turned out there were lots of other businesses out there that began to think this way, and it's kind of hard to get older businesses who've been in a win-lose framework to make a shift. But young people coming up who are starting businesses, this is catnip to them. They love the idea they can prosper and do well while being good citizens in their community and creating value for all the stakeholders. So the movement's grown. It's now all over the United States. It's increasingly all over the world. We have chapters all over the world, and it's definitely, it's reached a takeoff point in any case.
So that's a good, a question that comes up sometimes that we get is, so how does this relate to things like the Shared Value Initiative and B Corp and B Lab and social entrepreneurship? Like, what would you say? Because it feels like there are a lot of things that have cropped up since then.
Yeah, well, you'd have to do them one at a time, and I wouldn't feel comfortable in a public setting criticizing any of the other fellow travelers that are out there, so to speak. I would say that one thing that sets conscious capitalism apart from all the rest of them is we're non-political. We're not pushing any type of political agenda. We have members in the organization. I mean, every individual can have their own political beliefs, but conscious capitalism itself is not attempting to be a political organization. It's a big tent. We're business people. We don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, libertarian, whatever you may be, that's your own business, but we're not going to have the organization take political stands on things. And many of the other parts of the movements have a definite political positioning. So we can network with all of them as long as they're not asking us to take a political position on, well, climate change, racism, defunding the police. I mean, whatever the issue du jour is, that's really not, conscious capitalism is about its 4 pillars: higher purpose, all stakeholders matter, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. So that's one way we're a little bit different than the rest of them.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and transition to the book, because it feels like what you're describing sounds deceptively simple. And this idea of like running a business for purpose and profit, and seeking this creativity, the extra creativity of stakeholder win-win-win-win solutions, and then keeping my eye on the culture as well, and then on conscious leadership. So I guess my first question is, you wrote the book Conscious Capitalism a while ago with Raj, and now, so what prompted you to write Conscious Leadership, and how do you contrast the two?
Yeah, I'd say there were a few different motivations. The first one is that we had 2 chapters in Conscious Capitalism on conscious leadership. And as I went around and talked about conscious capitalism, the questions I got more when I was talking to business people, the questions were all around leadership. Well, how do we operationalize this? This is all really good in theory, but how do you actually do it? How do you become a conscious leader? And I realized that the 2 chapters we had were okay, but we needed a lot more depth. So that was the first motivation. Secondly, I mean, I've been doing Whole Foods for 43 years. At some point, and then probably not in decades from now, I'm going to retire. And so I wanted to leave behind sort of my philosophy of leadership, the way we've run Whole Foods, and for Whole Foods, people to read, and for other entrepreneurs to read. And so it's part of my own personal legacy, I suppose. Thirdly, I just feel like these ideas are important ideas that I just don't think they just need to be more commonly known. We should lead with love. Love is not something that should be hidden in the corporate closet. We should put purpose first. We should act with integrity in all things. We should try to think win-win-win. We should think long-term. We should innovate. And these are all important business aspects. And I kind of felt like I just needed I had to get it off my chest. I mean, I think a lot of times you write a book because it's inside you and you just got to get it out.
So let's talk about Lead with Love. When we were preparing, you had said that was your favorite part of the book. So why, say more about that? Because I think a lot of people are struggling to figure out how love fits into the whole picture. We're hearing more about that. How do you do that?
Well, first I'll say that I do think love is like the most important thing in life. And when we get to our deathbeds and we're there, we're not going to wish we'd made more money. We're not going to wish that we had worked harder. We're gonna be thinking about the people we love. We're gonna think about our relationships and the things that we wish we would have said, or the people we wish we'd healed with, the people that we love and care about. That's really what matters most in life. And I don't think it's any different. Why should love be kept in the corporate closet? Why should not love? The two things people most want in life, in my opinion, and what they most want at work is they want to have purpose. People want to feel like their work is making a difference. And secondly, they want to be cared for, and they want to care back. I mean, so what I found, Whole Foods has one of the things that surprised Amazon when they merged with us, when they saw the seniority of how many people work at Whole Foods for not for a few years, but for decades and decades. And they do because we give them purpose and we give them love. We care about them. So the reason love is locked up in the corporate closet is because of the metaphors that we use to think about business, which are all pretty much hyper-competitive metaphors. Competition is part of business, and it's an important part, but it's not the only thing that matters in business. But that's how we tend to think about it. That's the way management thinks about it. That's not the way that stakeholders think about it. The customers aren't thinking about it that way. The employees aren't thinking about it that way. The suppliers aren't thinking about it that way. We use war metaphors to think about business. That's the most common type of metaphors. We use Darwinian survival of the fittest metaphors commonly. Only the paranoid survives, jungle out there, survival of the fittest. We use lots of sports metaphors, which are all win-lose metaphors. There can only be, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser. We've got all kinds of sports metaphors that are about winning. And that so many books, you want to write a bestseller, put something like winning on the cover of a business book, and it'll probably sell well, because those are the type of metaphors that we use to think about business. And when you have hyper-competitive war, Darwinian, and sports metaphors, generally love is kind of something, yeah, do that at home, but check it at the door here, because we're coming here to win. We're gonna kick ass. It's very macho type of metaphors. And again, competition is part of business, but the human experience is far richer than that. And so we do ourselves a disservice when we don't allow the full human being to show up. And I'm not talking about romantic love at the workplace or eros or sexual love or anything like that. Those are, you might argue, those are probably better left out of the workplace to the greatest extent possible, particularly in the climate we're in today with, well, I'm not going to get into that. But the caring, I mean, if you ask, why have I done this for 43 years? And the answer is simple. So many people I've done it with that I love with all my heart. These are the people that have been through all the struggles and all the successes together. That shared creation, those shared struggles creates the deep kind of bonding until you go through that with people, you don't, I'm not sure what I'm talking about, but those are the richest, some of the richest relationships I have in my life are the people that I built and created Whole Foods with. The people that, you know, next to my family, I love the most in the world. Why should that be locked up and hidden away? Love is very, very important, and it needs to be unleashed in our organizations.
John, as I was reading through the book, I was struck by several things. I mean, one of them was just so much is in there, and not only the theoretical or the kind of the philosophical part, but also then sort of real pragmatic exercises and places to go, things that you can do to work on these skills. What would you say to someone who says, boy, you know, the love side of things, the emotional side of things has not been my strong suit. And here I'm hearing you say that this is sort of the key pivotal part of leadership. It's the glue that holds everything together. Like, what if that's not something I'm comfortable with, or it's not my strong suit?
Well, all human beings are in our deepest core. Love is in our deepest core. It's what we all crave the most, right? I think that. And so this is an area of growth. This is an area where you need to grow. That it's, you could, I always say that it's called the law of the lid. Your organization's potential is limited by the potential of the leader. So as you become more conscious, as you become more caring, as you become more creative, as you develop as a human being and as a leader, that allows the rest of the organization to grow and develop as well. The things that are the biggest limitations in Whole Foods market, they're my limitations. And that's where I've held Whole Foods back. And I see that in other organizations that I'm connected to as well. The leader has an outsized impact, particularly the founder has an outsized impact on the larger organization that they're part of. So you need to learn and grow. That's our 8th chapter in the book, continuously learn and grow. You have to continuously learn and grow. And if you feel like love is an area that you haven't fully embraced, then you have work to do. And you have to practice. One thing we point out in the chapter on Lead with Love is that love is a many splendored thing. So it's part of its generosity and gratitude and kindness and care and compassion and forgiveness. And each one of those virtues, love is a set of skills. It's not primarily emotion. It's a set of skills that we can develop and practice. My wife tells me that I've become a much more skilled, loving leader since she's known me over the last 30 years. She said, you know, I always wondered how John did that. And he read these books and then he just practiced these things until he got good at them. It's like any other skill. You get better at loving as you practice it. You will become a more skilled leader if you practice it. You will become more conscious if you practice. If you don't, you won't. So you got to do the work.
So, well, you went to what I was thinking as I was listening to you, which is that, so it's not just like, okay, I'm not good at this and I have to I'm just going to have to resign myself to that.
Maybe you should resign. Maybe you should resign. Maybe you're holding your organization back. Maybe if you're not prepared to be the leader that your organization needs, then step aside, or step up, step down or step up. And this is what organizations are being called upon, in my opinion, in the 21st century. And we need conscious leaders, and there's answer the call or don't answer it, but your organization will flourish or suffer as a result of your own leadership abilities. That's what I believe.
I can hear that there's a real holding oneself. There's a piece of integrity in that, of holding yourself accountable for your own impact on the organization as the leader, as the senior leader.
It is an awesome responsibility. And once you realize that, well, it depends on how large your organization is, but in Whole Foods' case, you got over 100,000 people working for the company. I mean, that's an awesome responsibility. And the mistakes I make enable that organization to flourish. And the mistakes I make harm the organization and prevent it from flourishing. And when I make good decisions, the organization flourishes. And so that's an awesome responsibility, and you have to own it. And you have to, once I realized that I was holding the company back by my own ego, by my own hubris in the past, as I became conscious of that, I began to take corrective actions so that I would no longer be the bottleneck of the organization. So there's an awesome responsibility as being a leader. And yeah, you've got to take that responsibility on and live up to it. Become the leader that your organization needs.
So I want to remind folks that if they have questions, to feel free to put them in the Q&A. And we had a question you mentioned around love, this use of metaphors, and another one you mentioned in the book that I appreciate was just this idea of Shark Tank. Just it's all about like sharks and sports. And
who would climb into a Shark Tank? It was insane.
Well, it's good around the sports metaphors. My husband would say that's probably benefiting me to not have to use too many sports metaphors.
Shark Tank is not just a sports metaphor, it's a Darwinian metaphor, right? You got to survive sharks.
Well,
and by the way, that's a common metaphor. It's like it's a bunch of sharks out there. So boy, you better be the biggest, toughest shark or you're going to get eaten up, is another hyper-competitive metaphor.
Well, and that's the question that came up was, we had a good question, which is, why is it that those metaphors persist? Is this survival of the fittest idea, or selfishness is just a natural part of human being that can't be altered? Like, why do you think that sort of win-lose mentality persists?
I mean, that's going to take us too far afield to trace why those things have existed. Yes, it is part of human nature. So it is, and I've not denied competition's part of business. I happen to be a very competitive person myself, which anybody that knows, you'll say that John is one of the most competitive people I know. So it's you could talk about masculine and feminine, but it's hard to do that in today without getting into gender stereotypes, which piss people off. So I'm going to avoid that. But we need a whole human being, and part of that is that striving for excellence, the competitive aspects of it, and the other part is the caring, loving part. They're both important. We have to be both. We have to synthesize and integrate those to a higher level. It's not either or, it's both. It's and.
That feels like that is a kind of a key theme in conscious capitalism, is this idea of holding things that seem to be opposites, like purpose and profit, head and heart.
People tend to think in these dichotomies, and the world doesn't. That's just a human framework. It's not actually the way the world is. That's just the way we're choosing to think about it. I'm trying to get you to think about things differently. It's not based on either or, win, lose, rich versus poor, good versus evil. It's not a more simple morality tale. The world is complex. We are complex beings, and we have these things within this. I'm just trying to emphasize this other part of us that's been neglected, that hasn't had enough emphasis because we need, as a human species, as a country, as a world, we need to integrate these other aspects into our frameworks that have been relatively ignored and neglected. I mean, it's part of it's a macho thing. It's kind of men have dominated business. They've dominated wars, and they're more aggressive. Again, I don't want to get into the gender stereotypes because I'm going to get eaten alive. But these softer, more caring attitudes have not been fully expressed, and to the poverty of business, and to the poverty of our organizations, and to the poverty of our own lives.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're all recognizing that we have those. It's not about one gender or another, but we all have those traits inside of us.
Yeah, somebody just flashed up in the comments about zero-sum mentality, and that's exactly right. We have been taught a zero-sum framework. Somebody's gain is somebody else's loss. The amazing thing about business is not a zero-sum game. It's why the world's making so much progress in the last 200 years, because as commerce and business have been ascendant, we've created these multiple win-win-win scenarios. And the greatest, and the statistics are overwhelming. If you just go back 200 years ago, 94% of all human beings alive made less than $2 a day in today's dollars. 94%. The whole world was poor. That figure now is down under 8%. The world is gaining. Illiteracy rates 200 years ago across the planet, 88% of the people couldn't read. Now that's 12%. We've completely flipped that around. This has primarily been due to capitalism. It has been due to business. creating not win-lose, not a zero-sum game, but a positive sum game. That's the amazing thing about business and capitalism. And business people need to embrace it. We need to embrace it. It's not a zero-sum game. It is a game where, if you want to use a game metaphor, it's a game where there are multiple winners. And that's just a better way to think about life, in my opinion, multiple winners.
So I have a question for you. We've spoken a lot about the CEO role, but what advice would you give to leaders? And we get this a lot also from new leaders. And this kind of goes with another question that we have, focusing on the younger generations. Man, I sound old when I say that. But like, what advice do you give to leaders who are new in an organization or mid-level leaders? What impact? They'll often say, well, what can I do? I'm not the CEO. Where do I start with my own conscious leadership? What impact can I have?
Well, first of all, almost everybody underestimates the impact they have. If we could see how things ripple off from us, it's the power of the wake. If you throw the rock into the water pool, you see all the ripples come off of it. Each of us, in every interaction we have with people, we have bigger impacts than we realize. We just can't see the effects. One of the things when you write a book is you don't know if that's having an impact, right? You don't know, is that making any difference out there? But over time, people will come up to me and say, I read your book, man, it made a huge difference in my life. It made a huge difference in my business. My wife read it, it's had a huge difference. We don't always see that. And we don't see how we affect other people. And that's why we should be kind and thoughtful, because an unkind, we have effects for both positive and negative effects based on how we interact with people. When we react in a caring, thoughtful way, that ripples out beyond us. It affects other people, and then they affect other people, and that affects other people. The same thing is true when we do bad things or things in anger or envy or hatred or resentment. Those things also ripple out. So no matter, everybody is kind of a leader. It starts with leading yourself. And you can't be a conscious leader. You're not worthy to be a conscious leader of other beings and other people if you can't lead yourself. So start with leading yourself, whether you have mid-level or you don't even have anybody reporting to you. If you can lead yourself, if you can be a more caring, loving person, if you can be more thoughtful, more authentic, those have effects on other people. You're responsible for how you show up in the world every single day. And if you show up in a good way, you're going to have a positive impact on others. You show up in a really bad attitude and you're putting other people down and you're harming, you're having a negative effect. So that's what I'd say.
It sounds like also that I'm wondering if these different pieces of conscious leadership also, and of conscious capitalism, translate to the personal level too. Like, I could look at my own personal purpose, my own personal values. Who are my stakeholders? How am I doing at engaging them in my purpose and values? Do you think that's?
Yes, absolutely. As you become a more conscious, when you become a more conscious person, you become a more conscious leader. When you become a more conscious leader, you become a more conscious person. It's not just in business, it affects the rest of your life. I mean, all your other friends, all your other relationships, your family. In fact, if your family is all screwed up, you have to ask yourself, what kind of leader are you in your homes? I mean, it's not just at work, it's in all aspects of our lives.
So we have a question, and moving it more into the Q&A. One of the questions is sort of along these lines of, corporate America is not evolving fast enough to keep up with the expectations of the majority of the workforce, which is purpose, love, and compassion. In other words, like the Gen Z and millennials at 65%. What is one big innovation or transformation that needs to happen from these companies to recruit or retain this talent pool?
I think I'm going to make a couple of points. The first point is that most corporations don't survive that long because most corporations can't adapt to the changing world. The world changes, the world's evolving. Here's the good news. Most of the businesses that are having a huge impact on us today didn't even exist 30 years ago. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago, there was no Google, there were no smartphones, there was no Airbnb, there was no Uber. you could go on and on and on. Was Amazon around 30 years ago, 1994, six? Nope, Amazon didn't exist 30 years ago either. So the point is that new entrepreneurs come along who are not stuck in the past. They can create the new. And so the great thing about capitalism is that it's dynamic. And people always take a snapshot of the current and they say, how can these companies change? You know what? They will change or they will go out of business, because new entrepreneurs come up that are not stuck in the old ways. They create new patterns, they get new competitive advantages, and they build new companies. I mean, where was Facebook 30 years ago? I mean, where was Mark Zuckerberg? He was a little boy 30 years ago. So the world is not stuck and imprisoned. It's dynamic, it's renewing itself. And you just have to think long term. You have to see that. Now, that's my general answer to that is don't worry, it's going to change, I promise you, because new entrepreneurs are going to change it all. And the world will not hardly be recognizable 20 years from now to where it is today, just like today would have been impossible to predict 20 years ago. So the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musk and no Tesla 30 years ago or even 20 years ago. So the world's changing. I think that organizations can change because new CEOs come on that are younger, who again have new, fresh frameworks, and they do change their organization. It is harder to change a big organization because it has a culture that resists change, right? A culture is like an immune system. It can evolve, but it can't evolve that fast, because if it evolves too fast, it kind of destroys the integrity of its culture. But you do get new leadership that comes in that has been trained in the old ways, but also is thinking in fresh ways. So old organizations can evolve too, and the ones that survive tend to evolve. I'm seeing lots of corporations evolving now. I mean, look what the Business Roundtable came up with just in the last year and a half or so. Would that have been possible 10 years ago? Would they have come out with a stakeholder higher purpose statement? No way. No way that would have been happened 10 years ago. It is changing. And I guess, I think people should embrace the ideas in conscious capitalism, conscious leadership. Those are the ideas that I think are ascendant. And I do think those ideas will be the paradigm that most businesses will be thinking in another decade. They're gaining because they work better. Ultimately, in business, whatever works spreads, and this works. So it's spreading.
So you mentioned the Business Roundtable. Some people look at those organizations that are signing it and see that these are larger organizations. They have a lot of complexity. You know, it's not cut and dried, and perhaps express some cynicism about the signers of the Business Roundtable. Like, what's your perspective on that?
My perspective is that the enemies of business who don't like capitalism or don't like business hold business to an impossible standard and say, look, what a bunch of hypocrites. They're not living up to it perfectly. But they don't hold the rest of the world to those same standards. And because that's the way human beings are. That's the way organizations are. They're not perfect. And business has to adapt to it. It has to always adapt to the marketplace as it finds itself. It has to adapt to its customers. It has to adapt to what people want in the marketplace. So I think it's okay to hold business to high standards, but you should recognize that perfection and utopia are not possible and they will never be achieved. But evolution is possible, progress is possible. And that's what I see. I see a lot of evolution and I see a lot of progress. They see failures and hypocrisy. I see how the world was 30 years ago, and I'm amazed how different it is today than it was 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. They have no historical perspective. They can't see actual progress being made. I see it, and that's what I celebrate.
I appreciate what you're saying, because it does feel as if sometimes people can relate to this as if it's now a new filter, and then we're going to judge people as either in or out. And that there's a simplistic nature to that.
It's you know what? It's still like this dichotomy, this win-lose bifurcation. and they're
Interesting.
perfect versus imperfect, and woke or not woke, holding impossibly high standards, and people aren't measuring up to it, so they're doing no good at all. They're a bunch of liars and hypocrites. It's unfair. It's a bad way to think about people. It's a bad way to think about life. It's certainly the wrong way to think about business.
So, John, if I'm a new leader, I'm coming to this, I'm very excited and energized by what I'm hearing from you today. I'm feeling like I want to map this onto my business. Where should I start? Is there one of the pillars that's a better place for me to start?
First chapter of conscious leadership is put purpose first. Put purpose
Okay.
first. It starts with purpose. Put purpose first. And it's not that hard to find a higher purpose in business besides maximizing profits, because it's just about the value creation that your organization is doing. What value are you creating for customers? What value are you creating? What is the service or products that you're providing that people want? That in some sense you're making the world better because you're providing those services and products. And then seeing that in a larger context and asking, what is it that we're really trying to do here? Is it just selling widgets, or are these widgets being used in some way that actually is helping humanity to progress, that's making the world a better place in its own way? And then putting that framework around it, because the higher purpose will connect back to value creation, but it requires a deeper dive than most people normally make.
And I'm also hearing you say that purpose, and maybe this is implicit, but I'd like to pull it out, is it that culture, purpose, and values is not a substitute for having a business model that works?
No, of course not. Lots of purposeful businesses fail, and lots of business models succeed that don't have any articulated higher purpose. It's not a substitute for it. You put purpose first, but you got to have a business model that's you have to execute on a business model that's a good business model. I mean, that you can't. All of the other things that lead to business success, they don't disappear. This is like a new way to frame things up. It's a new framework. It's a new narrative. It's just a different way to think about it, a more constructive way to think about it. But yeah, you have to have a business model that works, or the highest purpose in the world just leads to good intentions, but failure. You're just a dreamer then.
That's very helpful. I think, it reminds me of the conversation about emotional intelligence and IQ, that IQ is sort of table stakes and emotional intelligence is what differentiates you. It feels like having a business model that works is table stakes, but what you're advocating for here with conscious leadership really gives you an edge, a competitive edge.
I don't quite think of it that way, because I mean, even on the IQ and EQ, I think I've said something similar, but I frame it up a little bit differently. I say that I found that over time, if somebody doesn't have a high IQ, they're not going to probably be a very good leader. But increasingly, that's not enough, because as organizations get more complex, the ability to communicate, the ability to have empathy, the ability to create relationships and teamwork prove to be important. And that's a degree of emotional intelligence. So IQ can get you into the game, but to really be successful, you need to develop your EQ, your emotional intelligence. Similarly, yeah, if you don't have a good business model, then your business is not going to succeed, but it will not reach its highest potential. And you may eventually run up against a conscious business that has a good business model too, and has a higher purpose, and has higher emotional intelligence, and has this greater degree of teamwork, and then you may be overmatched.
That seems like a great note to end on. So, John, I really want to thank you for taking us on a deep dive into conscious capitalism as a movement, and just really scratching the surface of the Conscious Leadership book. We're going to hand it back to Christina now for some closing remarks, and then we'll transition to our VIP session.
Thanks, Thea.
John and Thea, thank you so much. This was such a fascinating conversation and such a great way to kick off a Monday and start the week. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Conlin. I am a partner with Baker & McKenzie, and co-chair of the Food and Beverage Forum. I just want to thank John and Thea again for your commentary. It was fascinating. As someone who has worked in the food and beverage industry for most of my career, this was just a great thought-provoking conversation, and I love hearing the win-win-win proposition and thinking of the creativity and purpose and profit. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to note that there will be links sent out with information on Conscious Capitalism, and I also want to direct you to make sure that you check additional Executives Club resources for upcoming events, including an April 20th event with Sheryl Sandberg. Thank you again, John and Thea, and all the best to everyone for the rest of your day.
Thank you, Christina.
Thanks, Kristen.